Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here with my buddy Denis asleep on that chair over there to wrap up the month in reading that was May. Lately, I have been combining my monthly wrap up with a sort of look ahead to my reading plans for the month, but I've already done my reading plans for the month of June because June is a special month for me. I read pretty much exclusively LGBTQ books, and I put together a pile of possibilities that I'm going to pull from for the month of June. So if you would like to check that out, I'll put it in the comment section down below. And then this video is pretty exclusively going to focus on the books that I've read in May. And at least one of them I have not talked about in a Friday Reads video because I started and finished it over the weekend, but we'll get there. May was a good reading month because I read 8 books. Not all of them were great, but there were some really good ones in there, and we'll get into it. First, I want to mention a DNF. I did have one this month. It's Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. Let's just get that one out of the way. I had been listening to this on audio, and I was kind of excited about it because it sounds like a really interesting story, and it is narrated in part by Michael Urie, and that also sounded really interesting. But the execution didn't really land with me, and I know I've seen a lot of people, especially on Bookstagram, talking about how much they have enjoyed this book, so your mileage may vary. I ended up not really enjoying it, and I put it down, and I don't intend to get back to it. So the premise of the book, as described in the plot summary that you get on the jacket and in online blurbs, is that there is a woman who is cleaning an aquarium. That's her job. And she forms an unexpected bond with an octopus. And Michael Urie narrates the octopus, the chapters that come from the perspective of him. His name is Marcellus. And then she also narrates, and their unexpected bond does sort of involve a bit of solving a mystery about what happened to her son in the past, but it's not like a cozy mystery at all. What is not in that blurb is that there's at least one other narrator, and he was really annoying to me, and I was not interested in his story, and it felt like he actually dominated the narrative way more than either of the people who were in the plot description, so I just couldn't get past that. I put it down. A lot of other people have enjoyed it. You might, but that was my experience with the book, so I put it down, and I don't intend to pick it up anytime soon. The first book that I finished in the month of May was Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing by Lauren Hough, and I enjoyed parts of this book, and it's sort of like a memoir and essays. I actually read it for that prompt for the Montana Book Company's Reading Challenge for 2022. And here's the thing. I only really remember one of the essays since the beginning of the month when I finished this book. And that's not really great. I think I liked this book, didn't love it, and I think it's probably going to fade from my memory. And by the time we get to the end of the year when I'm doing my best books of the year, I don't think it's going to crack anywhere near into that. But it's also not going to be one of the worst books I've read. So it's just going to hover in the middle for me. I enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting, but really there's only one story, and that's the first essay in it, which is a memoir about something of a hate crime that happened to Lauren Hough and how her time in the military came to an end. And there are parts of it throughout the rest of the book that I thought were really interesting and kind of profound, but I don't think it's really going to last, if that makes any sense. And then I was inspired by a video I did, which was a look back at the Pulitzer Prize situation from 2012. That is a big year for the Pulitzer Prize because they had 3 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize and did not announce a winner. So I did a Pulitzer Prize deep dive into a year where there was no winner. It's the first time I've done that. There are a bunch of times when there have not been winners for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, but this is the first time I've done a deep dive on one, and they have become increasingly uncommon. 2012 was the first time since 1977 that they did not announce a winner, and I don't think it's likely that that will ever happen again because the backlash was really big, and I'll put a link to the video where I talk about the controversy, how it happened, and maybe a little speculation as to why it happened, because we don't really know, but you'll find a link to that in the description box down below. But anyway, one of the finalists for the 2012 Pulitzer Prize was Train Dreams by Denis Johnson. And spoiler for that video, it is the book that I would say should have won the Pulitzer Prize. that year. And what's particularly frustrating is that it was a finalist. It was right there, and somehow it didn't end up winning. As I talked about it, I kind of got excited to go back and revisit it because I haven't read it since it came out. And what's interesting as well, I don't think I mentioned this in the video because I hadn't seen it yet, was that I went to Storygraph, and when I opened my Storygraph account, it translated all of my Goodreads data into Storygraph. Somehow, I had rated this book 2 stars. Don't know if that was a glitch or if I was in a really weird bad mood when I first read this book, but no, I definitely upgraded that. It's fixed. But what a weird thing. Anyway, I went back and reread it, and I was going to do it in print because this is a really, really small book. It is only just barely over 100 pages, if that. Yeah, it's 116 pages. Really good book. I'd recommend it. And somebody told me that Will Patton reads the audio, and the audio was available on Scribd, so I listened to it and still loved it. Still think it should have won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. It's a very sad book. It packs a really strong emotional punch into such a small space. And I would say this, and a couple of other people who also read or listened to this book on audio have echoed that if you have read and enjoyed Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, this could be another really delightful novella for you, and really is a book that proves that you can have a really big emotional punch in a short amount of pages. And I think that bears out. So that is the next book that I had finished in the month of May. And then I read Solo Dance by Lee Kotomi, which is translated by Arthur Reiji Morris. And I liked it. I did not love it. It was actually a bit of a disappointment, especially because the ending just really left me cold. I had been really looking forward to this. It was one of my most anticipated books of 2022. I'll put a link to that video in the description box down below as well. And as time has gone by, the more I think about the ending and the more I think about the rest of the book, the more that sort of sense of disappointment settles in. Like before, I think I was a little more forgiving of a lot of the stuff that led up to the ending, and now I think the ending has just kind of tainted the rest of the book for me. And it feels like much more of a disappointment now than it did when I first finished, because I liked a lot of what the book was doing or trying to do, I was a little more forgiving of the ending, and now the ending is all just the sour taste that has been left in my mouth since I finished the book. And that's really unfortunate because I was really looking forward to it. I think there was potential for this book to go really well. It has a lot of trigger warnings, especially if, say, suicide or depression is a trigger for you, sexual assault is a trigger for you. It deals with a lot of those things. And I appreciated what it was trying to do, but the ending really kind of lost me. And that's all I will say about that. Don't really want to give away what happened in the ending. And after that, I took a bit of a detour because I started to read Tracy Flick Can't Win. I did a full review on Tracy Flick Can't Win and Election. I'll put a link to that in the description box down below as well. So I read the first chapter of Tracy Flick Can't Win and then decided I really needed to go back and reread Election by Tom Perrotta. So I did, and tore through it. It's not a very long book at all. I don't think it's even 200 pages. Yeah, it's 199. Oh, it's 200 pages exactly. So I read it. Again, the full review that I did on both books will be down below because Tracy Flick Can't Win is a sequel to Election. And I had really complicated feelings about both of them. And in the end, I don't think Tracy Flick Can't Win justified its own existence. It feels sort of like there's no purpose to it. You could just read Election and get a lot of the same points. I think Tom Perrotta's big point is that not much has changed since Election was published in 1998, but I don't think the book does anything interesting with that idea. And again, you can check out my full review in the description box down below. And I'm a little cranky about Tom Perrotta because it feels like I accidentally have read almost all of his books. There's only one of his books that I haven't read. And I talk about this a little bit in my full review, which again will be in the description box down below. But when I was young, I was in high school when this was published, He was kind of tailored to some of my interests. He's a little bit snarky. He has the point of view of a white male in this country, and that's me. And I just was interested in a lot of stuff. And then I really liked Little Children when that was published. So somehow I ended up reading all of his books, but his stuff feels very samey. And I really wish he would push his boundaries a little bit. And I think it's particularly disappointing to me that Tracy Flick Can't Win was his newest book, because instead of doing something different, and he does do different things occasionally, but he always goes back to his safe zone. And even when he does something different, like The Abstinence Teacher, which is probably one of his most pointed books, he's still doing it from the safety zone of discontented suburban people. And when he does things like The Leftovers, which is a huge departure because it's about people left behind in the rapture, he's still doing it from the point of view of discontented suburban people, predominantly white. I can't remember him ever doing a character of color. And he just can't really get out of that. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox about it, but that's my whole thing with Tom Perrotta. I think it's probably time I just leave it alone and don't go back to that well, because it's not doing anything for me anymore and hasn't been for a long time. The next book that I finished in May was a graphic piece of nonfiction. It's Paying the Land by Joe Sacco. I went into this with the wrong idea because I did a book haul revisit for the month of May, and this was on it. And I thought, well, I haven't gotten to it. I would like to. It'd probably be a pretty easy thing to finish in a day. So I'm just going to sit down with a cup of coffee on a Saturday and breeze through it. Well, it turns out this is not a book you breeze through. It's actually a lot denser than that. And I don't mean that in a bad way, although it does occasionally read like a textbook, but like an interesting textbook. I don't know if I'm making it sound terrible. It's not. It's actually very interesting. So this is about the systemic ways in which the Canadian government took land from Indigenous people in the Northwest Territory and took the land and also made those Indigenous people dependent on the government and dependent on systems like fracking that degrade the environment. And it's a bit of a painful book for all of that because it's terrible. And reading this from the perspective of someone who is in the United States, you know that this happened here too. It's very painful. It can make you angry about what happened, but it is essential for a North American experience that has been marginalized and not paid attention to and not given due respect a lot of the time. So I would recommend this book, but don't make the mistake that I did, thinking that you can just sit down with it and breeze through it. No, you will have to engage with the text. You will have to do a lot of thinking. And it's not that you don't have to think or engage with the text in other graphic novels, but this is a book that wants you to reckon with its ideas. And again, it does present them in ways that occasionally feel like textbook, but because it's graphic, it doesn't feel like, have that sense of eating your vegetables that a textbook would, where, it feels like you're forcing yourself to do something that's good for you, but you don't really like it. This doesn't quite have that, but the information inside does feel a little textbook-ish. I'm going to stop talking about this book right now because I feel like I'm undervaluing it and I'm making it sound like something nobody's going to want to read. It is actually a really interesting and well-done book, and a lot of the interviews and stories that are told in it are, again, I think, essential, especially if you are someone who lives in North America, because this is something that is all too familiar for someone who lives in the United States. And I'll leave it at that for now. And then I finished Before Night Falls by Reinaldo Arenas. Finally, I had been working on this book for a while. This was the LGBTQ in Translation read-along selection for April and May. I managed to squeeze it in. I did not manage to squeeze in the runner-up, which was Disoriental by Negar Javadi. I'm hoping I will get to that in June and sort of catch up to it. And I liked a lot of parts of this, how it talks about a sense of alienation from yourself, especially as an exile, but also as a gay person in a time and a place in particular where homosexuality was really heavily criminalized and could make you an outcast from society and could make it impossible to live your life because in many circumstances, if you were found to be homosexual, you would be kicked out of your job, you could be kicked out of school, and it would go on your record, which means that you would not be able to find a job, you could be denied housing, and it would become impossible for you to live. Your family and friends would have to disown you because they wouldn't want to be associated with you and sort of pick up the taint of being around you. It's terrible. It did feel like the book sort of kept you at arm's length a little bit, but I did ultimately enjoy it, and I'm glad that I finally got around to reading it because I had wanted to read this book for 20 years. Around the time the movie came out, this is a movie tie-in, I had the book land on my radar, and I was waiting to watch the movie until after I read the book, and I never read the book. So now I can actually watch the movie. I have it from Netflix, I just haven't done it yet. So that is still in the works as well. But I'm really glad I finally got around to this. Didn't love it as much as I had hoped, but I did really like it, and I do think it's an interesting and engaging story as well. The final book that I read in the month of May is the one that I picked up over the weekend and managed to finish. I could have read it in a single day, but I didn't. It's Life Went On Anyway, stories by Oleg Sentsov, translated by Uilleam Blacker. This is a book that I got in one of my book hauls. I did a curated book box from a bookstore called Good Neighbor Bookstore in upstate New York. I'll put a link to the video in the description box down below. And because this is a really slim book, I knew I would be able to read it. It's even small in terms of trim size. So it is short in terms of page count. It is 104 pages, but it's also small in terms of trim size. So I knew I'd be able to read it quickly. I could have done it in a single day. By the end of, I think it was Saturday, I had only 2 stories left, and those 2 stories were pretty short. But I was kind of tired when we were going to bed, and I didn't really want to finish it just for the sake of finishing it. That didn't seem like it would be fair. So I put the book down and picked it up again Sunday morning when we sat down with coffee and our puppies, and I finished it then. I really enjoyed this. So part of why it was put into the curated book box, and again, the link to the video will be down below, is that the Good Neighbor Bookstore is promoting Ukrainian stories. Oleg Sentsov is a Ukrainian who has been in jail for protesting Russian encroachment on Crimea and all of that stuff. So this was actually published just as he was being released from prison unexpectedly, the translation, that is. And it is a collection of stories that he wrote. One of them was not intended to be published. It was sort of like an application for a film school, which is kind of funny. They are very semi-autobiographical, and you can kind of feel that as you read them. It kind of reads like a life story a little bit. And what's interesting is that it is political in some ways, but it's much more nostalgic. And I wasn't really expecting that. I was expecting it to be a little more political, given who he is, but even though I don't really know him. But there's a really palpable nostalgia for childhood, and it's really beautifully done. And it kind of makes you think about your own childhood and your relationship to your parents and your friends that kind of fade away as you get older, and grandparents and things like that, and the way the things that you value change over time. And that was all really interesting. I will say there are occasionally some awkward sentences, and I don't think that is a flaw of Oleg Sentsov. It's probably a flaw of the translation more than anything, but they don't detract from the book. I'm really glad that I got around to reading this. Again, it's really short. Could have read this in a single afternoon if I had really sat down and powered through it, but time just didn't really work out that way. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it, and it capped off a successful reading month. There are a couple of books I'm carrying into June with me. As I said, Disoriental by Negar Javadi is one of them. I had kind of put the audio to the side, but I want to get back to it. I was also listening to the audio of Ma and Me by Perrotta Rang, and I didn't finish it before the end of the month. But the good news is both of those are LGBTQ books, so I can finish them in the month of June. I don't have to stop and then revisit them at a certain point in the future. So I will hopefully be finishing both of those early on in June and moving on to other things. Those are the things that I read in May. Again, my plans for June will be in the description box down below. I'd love to hear what you read in May, what you watched, what you loved, what you hated, all of that stuff. Let me know what your plans are for June in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until then, happy reading.